I wanna be more like you and I.
This man is a serial killer. He claims the devil makes him do it.
I can't even fathom the amount of, pain and suffering I've caused people, man. And I get off of my cell, and it weighs pretty heavy on me. But I can't change it. If I could, I would. I'm stuck with what I got.
His 5 victims, 4 women and 1 man, are found over a 3-day period. All are stabbed to death. The women are petite brunettes. 3 are sexually assaulted, some horribly mutilated. They are students at the University of Florida with no connection to each other. The Florida city of Gainesville is in turmoil. Then the killing stops, but the fear is just beginning.
Very nervous. It's scared. Thing is, in my apartment we have the 4 girls. All 4 of us are brown hair, petite girls. All 4 of us have moved out of our apartment and are living with my roommate's parents in Ocala.
By Wednesday, Gainesville's in pretty much a state of panic. You couldn't walk around Southwest Gainesville without being stopped and questioned as to your activities, where you were going, and what you were doing.
Special Agent Ed Dix joins the investigation the day after the last 2 bodies are found. It is the first week of class.
The kids naturally are out doing other things, and parents couldn't find them, so parents are either calling the police to find them or they're coming up here. The news is feeding the frenzy, trying to report everything that's known, and Gainesville is just turning into a city of terror, really.
As the American Labor Day holiday starts, hundreds of students flee Gainesville, some for the long weekend, some for the rest of term.
School is hard enough to think about all the classes you have to take, and to have to worry about some maniac at the same time, it's just too much.
My mom called me this morning and told me to come home now.
And I'm hoping that they discover who's doing this by the weekend. And if that's not the case, then I'm going to bring my daughter home till this is solved.
We did not know who was doing the killings. And so we try to get the word out that this is happening. You need to be very careful. Lock your doors, stay inside. Let's not venture out this week for parties.
Those who stay are not in the partying mood.
Krista Hoyt, Sonia Larson, Tracy Paulus.
Hundreds attend a memorial service for the victims as they try to come to terms with what has happened. Others express their grief on a wall near the campus. The University of Florida does not cancel classes. Instead, security is increased with 24-hour police escort services and police whistles for students. The students who remain stay together in groups, arming themselves in case the killer comes back.
My fiancé and his friends are all staying at my place.
If the killer has been quick, the police respond with equal speed.
By the end of that afternoon, which is Monday, the day we found our 3rd victim, we had already established a task force, and we were dividing investigators up into teams, doing neighborhood searches, doing actual interviews of all the residences around the victims' apartments.
While the first 2 killings are in the Gainesville Police Department's jurisdiction, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th are in the county sheriff's area. To contain the panic, the sheriff's men and the police brief the media, students, and residents as the investigation progresses.
The murder was found in Ocala? No, that's incorrect.
Part of this effort is a rumor hotline to check which information is true or false.
We had our own units in the parking lots of the apartment complexes. We had them in every shopping center. You literally couldn't throw a stone and not hit 4 or 5 police officers. That's exactly what we wanted to, the atmosphere that we wanted to create.
It was to try and bring in a police presence so that it could not continue, so that if this person is still out there preying on people, that we would hopefully catch him.
2 weeks after the discovery of the bodies, police search for evidence in the woods around Gainesville. They look for anything the killer may have left behind. Even ponds are drained as investigators search for clues.
The actual enforcement contingent of it would be the entire Gainesville Police Department, Alachua Sheriff's Office, University Police Department, the 40 to 50 troopers that were brought in each week, the 100 plus FDLE agents that were here, primarily as investigators, but they were on the street asking questions and following leads, so they were out and about. For the woods searches, the searches of areas looking just for anything that might lead to the suspect.
None of this activity comforts the victims' families. As the news comes in, they are devastated.
Oh, Sonia was a delight to be a mother to. She was every mother's wish for a child. Bright in school, great grades, didn't have to tell her to study.
Sonia Larson had gone to Gainesville to study education.
She had worked summers at the church nursery in the daycare center and just found out she loved being around the little children. So she decided she wanted to have her own daycare center.
Sonia had been accepted at a school close to home, but her parents wanted her to go away to the University of Florida.
She was 18 and she was getting an apartment with a girl that she had met in summer, and they really hit it off. They were kindred spirits.
Ada Larson had gone with the girls to look for an apartment.
I actually wanted them to pick a different one, but I let them choose. The other one, I think, had a little bit better security.
At around 3 in the morning on the 24th of August, the killer, wearing a ski mask and armed with a knife, goes to the Williamsburg Apartments, where he breaks into the back door of apartment 113. Upstairs, Sonia Larson is sleeping. The killer stabs her 15 times as she tries to defend herself. She is dead within a minute. Next, he goes downstairs where Christina Powell sleeps on the couch. He tapes her hands and cuts her clothes off. He then rapes and sodomizes her before stabbing her 5 times in the back. She is conscious for a few moments before she dies. The killer mutilates Christina's body and then cleans it with dishwashing liquid. Then he arranges the 2 bodies in a pose. On Sunday night, the police call Sonia's mother.
I was just having a fit. I was just screaming. No, it can't be, not Sonia, just yelling. My husband didn't know if I was going to be able to make it because he knew how close Sonia and I were. I mean, she just meant everything to me, and he just didn't know if I was going to make it.
They immediately decide to go to Gainesville.
And on my way to Gainesville, I told him to stop the car. So he pulled off at an exit. And I just got out of the car and I looked up at the heavens and the stars were just beaming so brightly. And I said, God, how can you, who are in control of everything, allow this to happen,
She was highly intelligent, always intelligent from the time she was born. Always wanted to know questions and answers.
Krista was a bubbly type person, is how I would describe her. She was always happy. She enjoyed life. She enjoyed doing anything and everything, all kinds of organizations that she could get involved in.
One of these organizations is the Explorers, a training program for the Sheriff's Department. Krista Hoyt wants a career in law enforcement and works a night shift as a records clerk for the sheriff. When she fails to arrive for work, a deputy from the sheriff's office goes to check on her. It is 9 hours after police discovered the first 2 bodies. The killer has broken into her apartment. Her hands and mouth have been bound with insulating tape. The killer has cut off her clothing, raped her, and stabbed her in the back. Krista Hoyt dies quickly, but the carnage doesn't stop. The killer leaves the apartment. Then, realizing he's dropped his wallet, goes back to look for it. And then, he decapitates Krista Hoyt and poses her body. Anne Garron is Krista Hoyt's mother.
I feel like if I'd have been there, I would have died, maybe she would have lived. But of course everybody says, what makes you think you'd be alive? You both would be dead.
Anne Garron lives in the Gainesville area, so already knows about the first victims. But nothing prepares her for when the police come to the restaurant where she works.
And I thought maybe she was ill or had been in a wreck. And he said, no, it was homicide, and I couldn't even figure out what that meant at the time. It was like a foreign word.
But it is one that Krista's father and stepmother, Diana, understand perfectly.
And my husband pretty much kept saying to them, just tell me she died right away. That's all I want to know, is that she died right away.
But there is more to come. Early in the morning on the 27th of August, the killer stalks his final victims. He watches Tracy Paulus through her bedroom window at the Gatorwood Apartments. Tracy Paulus is a political science graduate. Her roommate, Manuel Taboda, wants to be an architect. Manuel and Tracy have been friends since high school.
These are the kids that, the most popular kids in their class, in their school. This is what every parent hopes that their children would turn out to be.
In the summer of 1990, Manuel's roommate moves out and Tracy moves in. That summer, Manuel loses weight, and at a muscular 6'2", he is strong and fit. At around 3 in the morning, the killer breaks in. Manuel is asleep in his bed. He wakes up fighting, trying to give Tracy time to get out of the apartment. In a fight to the death, he is stabbed 31 times. Investigators say Tracy Paulus hears the noise and comes out of her room where she sees the killer. She knows what is going to happen next. "You're the one, aren't you?" she asks. "Yes," the killer answers. "I'm the one." She is bound with insulating tape, sodomized and stabbed 3 times in the back. It is several minutes before she bleeds to death. Then the killer has sex with her again. Mario Taboda is driving in his car when he hears the news.
The first person who they mentioned was Tracy, and I don't think they said, I don't recall them actually saying the name. I think it was more describing as a cheerleader, and maybe towards the end they said the name, and I knew what was coming next. I just knew it.
We were still up there when they found Krista. And then on our way home, they found Tracy and Maddie. And we heard it on the radio on the way home. It was just a nightmare.
We're talking about a man with a tremendous intellect. He has a detailed knowledge of anatomy, electronics, he's a hacker.
God knows what else he can do.
He craves, he depends on new challenges, puzzles. He probably killed for the first time just to see if he could get away with it. And then he began needing greater and greater levels of difficulty.
This is the way serial killers get described on television and the movies. But in real life, they are more often the quiet type who blend into the crowd.
Jeffrey Dahmer was a serial killer. John Wayne Gacy was a serial killer. David Berkowitz was a serial killer, and there are many others. At any given time in this country, we have between 30 and 50 serial killers on the loose.
John Douglas is the ex-head of the FBI's Investigative Support Unit and a pioneer in the field of criminal profiling. He's called to Gainesville to help find the killer.
Serial killers, by and large, are more times than not, they're going to be white males. They're going to be perpetrating crimes in their own race. They're going to commit their first violent crime somewhere around their mid-20s. They're going to be above average in intelligence, but they're going to be low achievers.
The first signs usually appear early: bedwetting, cruelty to animals, and starting fires. Then they move on to people.
Many of these characters will start off as peeping Toms. Then it gets a little bit more courageous on their part. They now will break into a place looking through a potential victim's garments, or the next level is to go in and to rape a woman. And then they go along with the raping, and then finally that is no longer satisfying, and then it escalates to murder.
In criminal profiling, using a knife has special meaning.
It tells you that the subject wants to get really up close, wants to really see it firsthand, the pain and suffering that he is dishing out to the victim.
It is while police are talking to students at the final crime scene they get their first lead.
One person that came to our attention very quickly was a young man named Edward Humphrey, who allegedly had been telling waitresses in restaurants where he went that certain details of the crime scenes that had not been telecast or broadcast, we had not put out to the media.
Edward Humphrey, an 18-year-old University of Florida student, lives at the Gatorwood Apartments near Tracy Paulus and Manuel Taboda. Scarred in a car crash years earlier, Humphrey isn't liked by the students.
He's a strange acting person, keeps to himself a lot, looks like he's been through a lot, looks like he's got a lot of emotional problems.
They started talking about his liking of knives, that he would go out late at night or early in the morning carrying a large knife. He'd be dressed in camouflage. Many times he'd put a bandana on, and he would tell them he was going out on recon. He would come back in the very early hours of the morning, really dirty, sometimes scratched up from the bushes and all.
According to investigators, Humphrey is a manic depressive who's being treated with the drug lithium. But he'd stopped taking his medication at the time of the killings. This causes erratic mood swings. In what seems to be one of the most damning pieces of information against him, Humphrey apparently has a history of violence against women. 2 days after the last bodies are discovered, he is arrested and charged with assaulting his grandmother. But while Humphrey remains the prime suspect in the killings, he isn't the only one. The murder task force get a call from a detective in Louisiana, where they have 3 unsolved murders, strangely similar to the ones in Gainesville. In the Louisiana killings, the victims are Julie Grissom, her father Tom Grissom, and her 8-year-old nephew Sean. Police believe that Julie Grissom, a 24-year-old nurse, is the primary target of the attack. She's been bound, raped, and stabbed. 2 days later, the Louisiana murders are brought to the attention of the Murder Task Force for the second time by VICAP, the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program.
It's a computer system for violent crimes nationwide, and if they're not solved, they'll put their modus operandi, their MO of the crime. And I found Shreveport, Louisiana. Julie Grissom had been murdered there in 1989, and it matched perfectly the Sonia Larson situation, that victim in the first crime. And so I was convinced from that point on that we already had a relationship.
Although police can place the scarred Ed Humphrey in Gainesville at the time of the first crime, they cannot connect him to the second or third murders. But there is an even bigger problem with the man that looks like the perfect suspect. The killer left semen at the crime scenes, and from this, police learn that the killer has type B blood. Ed Humphrey's blood type is A. Police handled close to 7,000 calls as the investigation continues. Among them, another call from the police in Louisiana. They have received a call from a woman living on the border with Texas who sees a news report about the arrest of a man in Ocala, Florida, for armed robbery. The suspect is from the scene of a triple murder with similarities to the Gainesville killings.
only about 30 miles away in Ocala. We found an individual in jail there that's from Shreveport, Louisiana. His name was Danny Rolling, and he voluntarily gave us blood and pubic hair.
Danny Rolling, a 36-year-old drifter and career criminal, has a string of convictions across the southern states. He is also wanted in Louisiana for the shooting of his father, a retired police officer, just 3 months before the killings in Gainesville.
And so they started the DNA profile. I believe it's like the middle of January, the first probe of DNA comes back, and it's a match to Danny as well, which then everything shifts to Danny Rolling as a suspect.
Danny Harold Rolling is now the primary suspect in the serial killings. His DNA matches that found at the crime scenes. By June 1992, Rolling is in prison awaiting trial on armed robbery charges when he's finally charged with the murders. He pleads not guilty. The state attorney's office sends 3 detectives to interview him. In the recorded interview, Rolling brings in another inmate called Bobby Lewis.
Bible is my mouthpiece. He is my confessor. I confess to him. He will speak to you.
Rolling agrees to be interviewed using his friend Lewis as a mouthpiece.
August 26th, 1990. At the Williamsburg Apartments in Gainesville, Florida, there was 2 female victims killed. Was Danny Rolling responsible for these homicides? Yes, he was.
Several days later, the detectives meet with Rolling and Lewis again. This time, the interview is videotaped. Rolling tells the detectives that he has several personalities that inhabit his body. As well as Danny, there is a personality named Enad, who rapes and robs, and Gemini, the evil spirit who kills. Rolling says the motive for the killings is his previous imprisonment at the Mississippi State Penitentiary, where he claims to have been forced to live in substandard conditions.
My cell got flooded out once and twice a day with raw sewage. Not every day, 2-3 times a week. I begged them to let me out of that cell. It was like about that deep, about like maybe 3 inches of raw sewage. You ever tried to eat your supper in raw sewage? That's when I went ahead and swung the door wide to my mind, to the force that I call Gemini, which is a demon.
Rolling vows revenge on the society he says allowed him to be abused. 1 victim for each of the 8 years he's been locked up. This accounts for the unsolved killings of the Grissom family. Police uncover enough evidence in their investigation to convince them that the killer is Danny Rolling. So much so that the case for all practical purposes is considered closed. The 3 Louisiana killings plus the 5 in Gainesville, Florida, equal the 8 years Rolling has been imprisoned. Rolling will never confess to the Louisiana killings, but in a statement he reads to an Orlando television station in February 1993, he repeats his earlier wish to help the police with the Gainesville murders.
Any and all parties involved in the investigation underway concerning the Gainesville murders have been and will be dealt with in an honorable fashion. The wheels of justice may turn slow, but they do turn. You don't ask of justice, it asks of you.
By September 1993, Danny Rolling is back in court for a hearing on an armed robbery he committed after the killings.
Please, the court. Could I address the court? Sure, say whatever you want to say. Thank you.
Because he is also charged with the Gainesville murders, the media is there. Among those in attendance is Rolling's fiancée, crime writer Sondra London. They've become engaged while writing a book on the killings.
I recall the day I first saw you. I reached out to say I love you.
In February 1994, Rolling finally goes on trial for the Gainesville killings. He's already serving 5 life sentences plus 270 years for a series of burglaries and armed robberies. On the first day of the trial, to everyone's surprise, Danny Rolling pleads guilty to the murders of 5 students at the University of Florida.
I've been running from first one thing and then another all my life, whether from problems at home or with the law or from myself. But there are some things that you just can't run from, and this being one of those.
We tried to counsel him that his chances of prolonging his own life were better if he went to the jury trial than if he entered the plea of guilty. But he did not seem to be overly concerned about that.
Rod Smith, the newly elected state attorney, leads the prosecution.
Danny Rolling sits there as the person who killed, in murder in the first degree, Sonia, Christine, Krista, Manuel, and Tracy.
The focus quickly shifts to the penalty phase of the trial, where the jury must recommend how Rolling will be punished: life in prison or death. To get the death penalty, the prosecution must convince the jury that Danny Rolling was not insane at the time of the killings, that he knew exactly what he was doing, and that means taking the jury into the mind of a killer.
Remember, we already know who's guilty. We already know who committed these crimes. What we're going to do now is examine how they happened.
According to the prosecution, it all begins at this Army-Navy store in Florida, where on the 18th of July 1990, Danny Rolling buys a Marine soldier's knife. A month later, on the 18th of August, Danny Rolling is on the road again, heading for Gainesville, where he checks into the University Inn. On the 23rd of August, Danny Rolling goes to Walmart, where he buys a tent. He leaves the hotel and moves to a campsite in the woods. There, he tape records a message to his family. In it, he tells his brother the best way to kill a deer.
Aim for the lungs, straight through the rib cage. Either there or the heart, but best thing to do is hit the lungs.
And then a final message to the father from the son who has never felt loved. A chilling message of intent.
Pushed me away at a young age, Pop. I wanted to make you proud of me. I let you down. I'm sorry for that. Well, I'm going to sign off for a little bit. I got something I got to do.
Within hours, Sonia Larson and Christina Powell are dead.
So Danny's evil. Danny's mean. Danny's demented in the sense that he enjoys doing things that hurt people and hurt them horribly.
The prosecution shows photos of the bodies to the jury.
No doubt in my mind, the case was over when they saw the photographs. They knew their client could not survive those photographs. I mean, there were jurors who would look at them, and when they saw what was in those photographs, Danny Rolling was going to the electric chair, in my opinion.
They didn't just up one day and say, okay, Dan, you're going to be a serial killer. No. Lucifer, he was at me for a long time, knocking on the door to my mind.
The defense asks the jury to consider mitigating circumstances that it says led Danny Rolling to kill, that he is mentally ill due to years of abuse by his father.
Year after year, just one thing after another, it just got worse and worse and worse. And one day I was about 35 years old, and it just went chink, and I went over the edge.
In his trial, the defense claims the answer to Danny Rolling's serial killing started here at 6314 West Canal Boulevard in Louisiana, where he lived with his brother Kevin and his parents Claudia and James. His mother, Claudia Rolling, has now died from liver cancer, but her videotaped statement claims that the violence started when Danny is very young.
how frequently would the boys, particularly Danny, receive a whipping?
Well, if it was a verbal whipping, it was every day.
How about physical?
Often, probably about twice a week, something like that.
In fact, Danny seems to have made himself the target of his father's rage.
He would do things to draw attention to himself in front of his dad. It was almost as if, you won't hug me, so hit me.
A neighbor of the Rollings is Bernadine Holder.
He just physically started beating the boy in the front yard on the porch. And he was beating him with such a force that I called the mother at work on her job, and I told her to come home because I was afraid the man was going to kill him.
Did Mr. Rolling ever express, Sr. now, Mr. James Harold Rolling, ever express to you his feelings about Danny?
He hated him.
Did he use those words?
He hated him. He told me he hated him. He told me he would kill him.
And Rolling's cousin claims there have always been other forces at work besides his father.
He ever talked to you about spirits, demons, or devils?
Danny would talk about visions of demons, people in his dreams beating him, going through a gauntlet of people, striking him with sticks, torturing him, demons gnawing at him.
Rolling drops out of high school. After a brief stint in the Air Force, he is given a general discharge. He ends up going home. He joins a Pentecostal church and claims to find God. Within minutes, he meets Omeitha Ann Halko. After a 4-month courtship, they are married. But, says Rolling, the newlyweds are not alone. The devil is with them.
I don't know what Gemini, the demon that came in my bedroom window in Shreveport, Louisiana, when I was going to church, driving a Sunday school bus, trying to live right, trying to do the right thing, and love God with all my heart. The best years of my life. I don't know what them things think. All I know is they don't wish us any goodwill at all. They just want to see mankind destroyed.
Now, during the first course of your marriage, did you ever hear Danny or anybody in his family talk about demons or being visited by demons or anything like that?
I never did.
Did you ever hear anything about anybody named Gemini or Enad or any other name given to a spirit?
No, I didn't. The reason I left, decided to leave, was that he threatened my life with a shotgun.
Omeitha takes their baby girl and divorces Danny.
Well, that hurt. Well, I never got over that. Ended up in prison not too long after that.
After deliberating for 5 hours, the jury makes a unanimous recommendation to the judge.
So, Mr. Clerk, if you would publish the verdict of the jury, please.
We, the jury, by a vote of 12-0, advise and recommend to the court that it impose the death penalty upon Danny Harold Rawlings.
Before the judge passes sentence, Danny Rolling is allowed to address the court.
I regret with all my heart what my hand has done, for I have taken what I cannot return. If only I could bend back the hands on that ageless clock and change the past. Ah, but alas, I am not the keeper of time, only a small part of history and the legacy of mankind's fall from grace. I'm sorry, Your Honor.
And now he is sentenced.
Accordingly, it is ordered and adjudged that the defendant, Danny Harold Rawling, is sentenced to death for the murder of the victim, Sonia Larson, as charged in count 1 of the indictment. It is further ordered and adjudged that the defendant, Danny Harold Rawling, is hereby sentenced to death for the murder of the victim.
Danny Rolling is sentenced to death for the murders of all 5 students.
You having been so sentenced, I remand you to the custody of the Division of Corrections.
But the relative of one victim is not satisfied.
Down to 5. Understand that? In less than 5 years.
Mr. Snowden, remove Mr. Taboto from the courtroom, please, sir.
I wanted him to know that I was there. I wasn't afraid to speak up. There's a lot of other things I could have said, things that probably would have gotten me in a lot of trouble. But I just wanted to have the last word, I guess.
Since his conviction, Danny Rolling spends his time in his cell on death row at the Florida State Prison. He is appealing against his conviction. If he loses, he will be electrocuted. But even from death row, he remains in the public eye, mostly due to this woman, crime writer Sondra London. While no longer his fiancée, she works tirelessly on his behalf. She's created a website where she displays Rolling's letters, as well as offering his autograph and artwork for sale. And now there is a book. In 1996, London and Rolling wrote The Making of a Serial Killer. London claims Rolling wrote the book to stop other killers, a way to explain how and why the killings happened.
What Danny Rolling steps forward to say is that there is no satisfaction in vengeance. That's what his story is about. He asked for vengeance, he got vengeance, and it didn't satisfy him.
I don't know that the book is a deterrent for somebody else who's doing this. I mean, the fact that he's written a book and that he has a forum to speak out, to me, it's actually the opposite. To me, it feeds the mind of a killer.
I went to a bookstore hoping they wouldn't have it, and they did. And I leafed through it and read a few little passages and put it down. It was so evil. I just felt dirty handling that book.
But descriptions of Rolling's methods have emerged elsewhere. Janet Frake claims she survived an earlier rape by him. Like the attacker in Gainesville, the intruder wore a ski mask and carried a knife.
He sat on top of me and he was tying me up. At first he used thumb cuffs and those wouldn't work. So he used duct tape, and he also taped my eyes. After he found me, he took me to the bathroom, and that's where he raped me. All I could think about was I was going to be killed. And that's when I guess I made it. I don't know if it was a conscious decision or not, but I made a decision that I was just going to do everything he said to do so he wouldn't kill me.
And so she started talking to the attacker.
I was saying I was very thirsty and very hot, and that wouldn't a beer taste good? And that obviously sounded good to him. So that's when he finished and made me clean up. And then we went into the kitchen and sat at the dining room table. And I got him a beer. And we proceeded to talk for a couple hours. And I had to finally ask him to leave. He left and said, "Don't call the police for 10 minutes. That's what I did.
When she sees Danny Rolling on the television, she is certain he is the man who attacked her. Police later matched DNA from the crime to Rolling. Frake wants Rolling prosecuted for the rape, but Rolling's 5 death sentences prevent it. So Janet Frake files a $1 million civil lawsuit against Danny Rolling.
I'm trying.
To Rolling, all this is irrelevant. He sticks to his story of evil spirits guiding his hands.
More like you.
A serial killer called Gemini, who he claims lurks inside Danny Rolling. Serial killer.
There's a complete and utter change of mood a week from now when we've got the beauty pageant to end them all. Ruby Wax will have her hands full, trust me, as she brings us the television spectacular where men are men. Or are they? Join us for Tranny of the Year next Friday at 10:50. More of that in a mo, but stay with us now for a little bit of sex, comedy. We're sleeping together straight after the break.